Beyond declaring how you're going to make decisions, who's going to make the decisions, and doing that all up front, there's a process that will lead you to consistently better information and decisions every single time. And this is the ABC decision process. Let's just quickly go through it and then I'll expand upon it. A is align to what you want. B stands for broaden your options. C stands for compare contenders. And D stands for detach and decide. Now let's break it down. A, align to what you want. I can't tell you how, I can't actually remember a time somebody came to me and said, Jill, I have this decision to make. And I said, so tell me, how are you rating success? What will have to happen for you to know that was successful? I have yet to have someone go, these are the parameters that will tell me I was successful. That's where analysis paralysis comes from. We're trying to make a decision, but we don't know where we're trying to get with that decision. 2, broaden your options. Before I dive into how to broaden your options, let's look at why to broaden your options. So how do a lot of decisions get posed? Should we do this or that? Should we do this or not? Well, as it turns out, the research shows that when we ask the question, should we or shouldn't we do this, we fail 50% of the time. We have a less than optimal outcome just by asking that question. When we ask the question, should I do this or this, when we have 2 options, when we ask the question, we have 2 options, it's only slightly better. We fail 33% of the time. I think you'll agree that failing 1 in 2 times is not okay, and failing 1 in 3 times is not okay. According to research, we are far more likely to make a great decision when we start with 3 really good, viable options. And this is where it's like so incredible to see what happens when I guide groups in coming up with those 3 options. It's like, well, what could we do? Like, let's think about the outcome we want. And by shifting the question from should we do this or that or blah, 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 and just saying instead, so what could we do? What else could we do? What else could we do? And you just keep asking that question. You just keep asking it over and over and you'll get a lot of stuff. And then to get to those 3 options, sometimes one really cool technique, and this is really fun if you're like, kind of like, oh, but I really like this or that, right? Kind of go, can we do this and that? It's a really powerful option. Can we do this and that? Another really fun one, if you're super stuck and you're like, oh, but I can't think of that 3rd option. I can only think of these 2. And by the way, the 3rd option is there. It's just like your mind is telling you it isn't. If that's happening, there's a really cool little trick you can play. You could say, well, what if it were impossible? What if it were impossible for me to do these 2 things? Then what could I do? And so if you take your 2 options off the table and pretend, it's called disappearing options, and pretend they don't exist and say, well, what would I do if there was no way I could do those 2 things? And that could allow your brain to go off into the different directions. So now we've aligned to what we want, right? We've got 3 fantastic options. We're like, I can't choose between these 3 fantastic things. And then it's time to compare contenders. Now, a lot of people, when they kind of are ready to compare, they use something called pros and cons, right? What are the pros? What are the cons? Well, I was very surprised to find out that pros and cons is, in fact, notoriously terrible tool for making decisions. In fact, apparently what pros and cons does is just help us just relive our biases and old behavior, and it actually really we're closed to new possibilities when we use them. And this is bad because when we're making decisions, we want to be able to really see the information in front of us for what it is and the goal that we're aligning to for what we want. And we really want to have this neutrality. And pros and cons doesn't give us that neutrality. So what do you do instead? What you actually do instead is you kind of pretend like you're a lawyer. You kind of pretend like you're building a case. And you take each of your great and fantastic options and you make a little case. You say, well, this would be the best if, right? And you look at your alignment and you go, well, the reasons that this could be the best option are, and it would be the best option because, and you really look at all the ways that it could be the best option and get you towards your alignment. And you build this positive case towards your alignment with each of those other things. And then you can really see amongst those contenders which of those three options gives you more of the things you are looking for. And then D is decide, right? But decide how you agreed to decide. So what did you say you were going to do up front? What process did you say you were going to follow? Follow the process that you committed to up front. And the other thing you want to do is not be emotional. The other thing that really goes wrong in decision makings is sometimes we're just like overly confident, or we're overly nervous, we're overly afraid, we're worried if we fail, how will others perceive us, what will happen, and we get all these fears, we get all these insecurities, or we get this overconfidence. What has been demonstrated in the research is if there is sort of high emotion, either fear or overconfidence, that often we can make much less good decisions. It's actually been shown that people who kind of have the emotional centers of their brain are muted and they don't feel as much emotion as other people are much better investors, and they make more money on the stock market because they're really able to see data and information for what it is. So you want to put that to work for you, and you want to make sure that before you make important decisions for you or your group, that you're really taking that moment to detach and then decide, and just really sit back. For a more complete picture of ABC decisions, take the full course. But for now, even with that, you can start to realize, ooh, there's a lot that can be done to make better decisions.